All right, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. This meeting will be video recorded and broadcast over local channel access 8 and through the town website at www.eastham-ma.gov.
And I'd like to say that the Finance Committee has a quorum and we are calling to order the
All
joint
right.
meeting.
We'll start with public and select board information. Anything from the board that is not on the agenda?
I'd like to, at some point, this may not be the right meeting, but talk about some of the fire preventative measures or how we would respond to some major disasters, given what's been going on in the rest of the country lately over the last 6 months. And it kind of dawned on me that there must be plans in place that I might be ignorant of. So I'd like to be brought up to speed on that.
All right, good one.
I have a shameless pitch for Conservation Commission tomorrow. Is reviewing their
Wetland bylaws? No.
pressure treated wood.
Oh.
Pressure treated wood.
Oh,
I
right.
would love,
What time is that meeting?
it starts at 6. Yeah.
6. Okay.
Here in the Euro Mountain.
I don't know. I feel like maybe they're still online
Right. I can find
They
it.
could be, yeah.
because
I could
the
find
board
it.
liked it.
It's hybrid.
Yeah.
It's a hybrid?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, we have no one here from the public. Anyone from the Finance Committee have anything that's not on our agenda for public information? All
I
right.
want to say something.
Oh, sorry.
So I have two things. First of all, my town of Eastham email, Jacqui Beebe, has been compromised, and an email with an attachment went out to a very large swath of the public and other officials. At this point, so no one should open that attachment or try to open that attachment, or God forbid, give them any passwords of yours. But it doesn't appear to have compromised our data internally at all. But I just wanted to warn the public, IT is on top of it. We've changed all our passwords. We do have two-factor authentication. So I'm not quite sure how this happened, but I do apologize for anyone who has gotten it, and just be careful when it's asking you to share. It's saying that I want to share a document with you, and I don't want to share a document. And then the second thing is, we have on the agenda tonight a wastewater update, and I'm going to postpone that to our next meeting. We have a capital projects meeting tomorrow. I want to talk to the capital projects committee meeting and do an update with them first. I think we'll have more information if I postpone that. So if anyone is on the call just for that, you can go back to your normal Monday evening activities
And miss our budget.
and miss the budget presentation.
All right,
Thanks, Amy.
sure. So our first thing, FY26 budget presentation, Jackie and Rich, take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce our fabulous Assistant Town Administrator, Finance Director, Rich Bienvenue, who's going to walk you through our proposed budget for fiscal year 26.
Thank you. And Devin and Wayne, if you could please share the presentation on the screen. Thank you. And thanks for the Finance Committee for being here. I have in your packet the presentation, which is really a summary, and I'm not going to go through in detail because, as you know, with the schedule that we've previously put out, that's what the Finance Committee will be doing each week for the next 2.5 months, if not 3 months, going through each department, speaking to each department, reviewing each individual departmental budget. And so all those meetings are recorded, and their deliberations and questions, the great questions that they ask and the great answers our department heads give them are all on those meeting videos. We are going to try to do a better job of getting that information out to folks this year, and folks, I'm meaning the community. This presentation is online at our townwide financial planning page, which really started in the summer, where we do a multi-year financial projection for the next 5 years on our operating capital budget. It goes into the end of year presentation of how we ended our fiscal year 24 was our last end of fiscal year end, so the financial results from that. And then we go through the budget development process. So there's a lot of information, as well as our financial management policies that the Select Board and the Finance Committee adopted a few years ago. And this presentation is in accordance and follows essentially all those things that I just referenced. We're on track to follow our financial plan in accordance with our financial management policies. And this is the impacts of what that looks like. And so we start with this quote here. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And the reason we went with that one is because it's pretty pervasive this day and age in local government that you can't get anything done and that we don't get big projects done. And it's hard because we and you, all yourselves represent the whole community, not particular agendas or particular perspectives. And so sometimes things take longer than you might want them to, or the result might be slightly different than what you want it to be. But that's because we got to consider the whole. And that's what we try to do. We've got smart people leading us on the Finance Committee and the Select Board. We've got smart, capable people as department heads and employees. And I want to ensure the community that, at least in our opinion, we do a good job. And we take it seriously when we get feedback about the impacts of property taxes. You'll hear me say that property tax wise tonight, we are doing well, comparatively speaking. Doesn't mean I don't understand. Some people might not feel that way. I think we do maintain a reasonable tax burden, and we'll go through some of that. But to all of your credits, we have set up mechanisms over the years to help. And I think that's been important. So we do have some support mechanisms in place, including a pretty robust human service funding, a family support package paying for tuitions, free lunches, which are now free anyway, and helping with some housing programs. And then we've always had the Timothy Smith Fund and other funds for emergency assistance and scholarship aid. And then this year, the introduction of the community fund. So those are all things, thanks to you, we have in place to help mitigate the impacts of things that we have to do. Because a lot of these things that are in here are really outside of our control. And I know everybody likes to think we could just make things become better, but it's not the case. There's some things we kind of have to do. And that's what the Finance Committee will be discussing as we go through each department's budget. So the bottom line is we shouldn't be afraid because we've got a plan. And it doesn't mean that it's pain-free. But I think we try to do our best to let everybody know what's coming down the road and the best and how we can best mitigate the negative impacts of that. So with that, if we go to the next slide, you see, I'm not going to spend much time here, but we start with the strategic plan and the goals and objectives of the strategic plan, the Select Board and the Finance Committee, and other perspectives that we hear from the community. And we build our budget around those items, trying to achieve all these things that feedback we get and give you our best recommendation. So if you go to the next slide, I kind of summarized on this first one page kind of the approach that this represents in the accompanying pages. This is a level services budget. So it's pretty clear to us with some overrides in the past couple of years that we're not going to be adding a lot to this budget, is keep things status quo. Unfortunately, status quo does require some increases in some areas for various reasons, which we'll go over some of them. So what you'll expect in here is that you'll see no new staffing, no new programs, expense accounts that have gone up just to meet the requirements of keeping them where they are. As a matter of fact, some expense accounts have gone up very nominally, where in past years they might have gone up more, representing our utilization of a little bit of an excess budget and some good results that we've had in some of the programs we've implemented. So I'll point those out when we get to that. We are continuing in this budget to address deferred maintenance needs. This has been my, I think, fifth budget. And I think after this year, we'll be in a really good spot on our maintenance, but we are still catching up on many years of deferred maintenance. And you'll see some of that in here. The good news is we are on a track now through the capital budget, equipment, vehicle, and building maintenance programs, funding these prospectively with a level amount each year, so that when relatively nominal equipment, vehicle, or building maintenance needs to occur, the money is there. And I think that's a tip to the cap to this whole group that since I've been here, you haven't done any borrowing for any of these types of things. But I would consider regular routine type capital items where the practice in lots of other towns is small borrowings for small things. And those borrowings have not only an interest cost, but time suck in preparing administratively for them and an issuance cost. So, but despite having a level service budget, we do think we're going to keep moving forward and bring to conclusion several initiatives and goals we've been working on. So we look forward to that. We are proposing to continue funding our reserves to maintain our appropriate balances. And a key thing in here is this is a big year for us for wastewater infrastructure. And so I'm not going to focus too much on that tonight because that really deserves its own separate discussion as we develop the funding plan to pay for wastewater. So, but obviously is a big element coming forward. The other thing that's in here is this budget started coming together, I was pulling together the final pieces of this about a month ago. Already things have changed. And so I'm sure we'll have some are relatively nominal, some are bigger. And the biggest one, also largely out of our control has to do with the school funding. And so that right now we have a budget that is balanced on the municipal side and provides for some level increase in school funding. But if the budgets come in higher than that, we will have to make some adjustment. So at some point, probably not tonight, but we should talk about what some of those things look like. Two other key points on this slide on the left. This is the third year of the operating budget without us seeking an override for general government services. And when I say that, I mean for what existed 3 years ago. Obviously, we had an override last year because we added 4 new police officers. That goes back to our philosophy and financial management practice that when we go to town meeting to approve collective bargaining agreements, that's the time to, if the people are inclined to approve and support those, which they ought to, they ought to also provide for the funding of them for the full 3 years of that agreement. Not approve an agreement just for us to come back in a year or two saying, hey, guess what, we can't afford this and now you need the override for these things. And so, an inherent promise that we try to keep hold to is you gave us the override to fund those collective bargaining agreements, so we're not coming back to you again for the life of those collective bargaining agreements for an override. Because outside of salaries, we ought to be able to manage everything else that happens within the course of a budget. So that's built into our financial projections, and we've been able to honor that intent with a balanced budget on the municipal side on that basis. And then finally, again, not too much detail for tonight, but I do want to, for a subsequent discussion, we need to make some decisions on the Water Enterprise Fund. Since last year where you approved a water rate increase as the water commissioners, we've got a new water operations contract that was quite a bit more expensive than what we had hoped. I think we'll easily make it through this next year and maybe even another. But beyond that, the level rates and the funding for capital costs of the water fund will become impactful to our operating budget on the general fund. So we need to make some decisions that will affect, 2, 3, 4 years out on the water fund. And a big part of that would be, increasing our numbers of people participating in that. So if I go to the next slide, you see here is what we call the budget summary. And this kind of accumulates into 3 different buckets. The first bucket being the operating budget. And as most of you recall, they've been here for at least a cycle or 2. These are recurring expenses, and so therefore we ensure that they are funded with recurring revenues. There are no one-time revenues in this bucket. The second bucket being our capital budget. And we do have some discretion on whether or not we need to do some of these things or not. But again, we have implemented the idea of vehicle, equipment, and facility maintenance recurring programs so that ensuring each of those things for each department and each building of town gets some amount of funding every year so that we can do the appropriate work that we need to do. Of course, in any one year, we could cut back on that. But it does not impact the tax rate such as it is, and it doesn't impact I should say, it doesn't impact the tax rate such as it is because it's funded by one-time sources, largely our free cash. And so that's been a key concept that we've been practicing for several years, is focusing not so much on the individual line item budgets of departments, because the way we vote and adopt those budgets does provide a degree of flexibility, and that's important to know. And if the things that we provide for don't occur, the money doesn't get spent. Hence the saying that you hear me say all the time, it's not how much we budget, it's how much we spend. And so we have great department heads that follow that philosophy. We have a good accounting staff, myself and Jacqui that monitor these things. We have a purchase order system, so anything over $5,000 requires a purchase order. So we focus on the spending to make sure that those budgets are only spent for what they're really needed for and when they're intended for. And so because of that, we do generate some savings off those budgets, and that savings becomes free cash. And that's what is needed this year in the middle column there, $1.9 million to fund our capital plan. If we didn't have $1.9 million of free cash, we'd have to find another way, probably borrowing to pay for those items or defer them, which is what we're recovering from since I've been here. So there's there's an art and a science to some of this budgeting. And then the third column is the other budget items. These are things that kind of fall outside of the operating budget because we're not intending to fund them year after year, or maybe if we do, it's the first year of it. Falls outside of a capital budget item. And largely these are things like the reserves, putting money in a stabilization fund. In this case, you see a big amount of money, $2,225,000 of free cash at the bottom of the page on that column. Most of which, $1,375,000, I believe is the amount, represents the savings on the short-term rental receipts versus what we budgeted for that, which is a couple $100,000 for some debt service, versus what we received. So our financial management policy is to steward those funds and take any savings on short-term rental receipts and put it into a wastewater stabilization fund, and that's what we're continuing to propose to do. It's really imperative that we have a wastewater stabilization fund because when we do finally move forward on wastewater, it's not like you just flip a switch and money starts rolling in and the bills start, clocking up too. No, we're going to have a lot of bills on an operating basis that won't have the revenue yet because people haven't connected and there's delays in billing, there's delays in paying. So you need a good amount of cash flow to implement a wastewater system, and that's what that stabilization fund is intended to do, to help smooth out that transition and minimize impacts to taxpayers. In this array of numbers, if you look at the total appropriations in the middle of the page, at any of those columns or in total, the total is $51,532,000 of appropriations. And you look down at the bottom of that page and you see $51,532,000. Revenue equals our appropriations. We're required by law to have a balanced budget, and we do. And we're required to balance it within the overall limits of Proposition 2.5, which is the next page, next slide. So obviously, property taxes are the largest source of funding our budget. Provides about just under 78% of our total funding. The bottom line on this is with the budget presented and proposed that we're going to be going through with the Finance Committee over the next several months. If all those were to come through as presented, the median taxpayer would see an increase of $188, a 3.3% increase in their tax bill. The columns here represent the last several years of tax levy calculation, with the shaded column there being what we project for FY26, and it shows the calculation. As you know, we're allowed to add 2.5% to our prior year tax levy. So under that shaded column, you see we started with just under 29.5 million. By law, we're allowed to go up 736,000. We get to add what's called new growth. That's new building and new value that didn't exist in the prior year. And we're estimating 185,000. We've had a couple of good years of results because of a lot of building activity. I don't anticipate it being as high. But I also think 185,000 ought to be achievable. So we don't know that number until early summer. It's when the state certifies that value after town meeting. So we got to be some conservative in that number, because if we come up short, we're therefore out of balance. So that brings us to a subtotal of 30 point almost 4 million. And then from that, we add what's called exempt or excluded debt, which is largely at this point, the water project debt and the remaining of smaller projects from prior years, which brings the total amount of taxes we're allowed to raise to 40.1 million. And our budget proposes to spend just under 40.1 million, leaving $43,000 of what's called excess levy capacity. And we certainly will need that as final adjustments come in on just minor things, never mind big things.
Yeah.
So that's where you see the calculation. We are, last year we crossed the $5 billion threshold for taxable value in town. At this point, we do see that continuing to increase, but at a much lower increase than in prior years. So this assumes a 3.5% increase in values. And if this property tax levy and those values were to materialize, that's where we get a tax rate of $7.74. And the average and median values, and you see there the median value of 5,806 compared to the prior year of 5,618, which is how I got the $188 increase. So nobody likes an increase, and I understand that, but I always find it valuable to talk about the next slide, which is how does that how do we compare against others? And I think we do pretty well, and this is where we come through, I think, shine, pretty well. This chart here is from the State Department of Revenue with the map of the state showing the different taxable burdens of various towns throughout the state. There are quite a few towns that have a lower tax burden than us, and they're almost all very small, very rural communities. I expect we will be in 2 or 3 years ago, we were in the bottom, right at the cusp of the bottom third of all communities in the state. And now with much of that wastewater debt coming on, we're still less than half, but more than what, the relative position has shifted from about a third to less than half of the tax burden of the other communities. And I always compare it to the state average single family tax bill. This chart is from the state that they finalized for last year, fiscal year 24, shows an average tax bill of $7,399. That for FY25 is going to be probably over $7,900, the state single family tax bill. And if you were to refer back to the prior slide, that we were projected to be $6,690. So about $1,200 plus less than the state average, which I know is no consolation if you don't feel you can afford it anyway. But that's why I allude to these great programs that you've put in place that hopefully can assist with some of those things. The other interesting thing I like to always pay attention to is the straight dollars is one thing and comparing it, but it's also important to consider your community's income, because if you're a very, very poor community, $6,300 might sound pretty good compared to $7,900, but it doesn't really do you any good if you're making a lot less money than those other folks. And so the bottom right here, you see last year's chart where we had the per capita income of our residents compared to our tax burden. And we were high 12s, 13% to 13.5% of our per capita income was going to property taxes. But with our relatively modest increase in property taxes projected for this year and updated per capita income figures for another year from the state DOR, we will be in the 11.5% to 12% property tax burden to our per capita income. Again, per capita is the total income of a town divided by its residents. So some people will be on the high end of that and some people will be on the low end of that. So I It's just a measure that we can easily track from year to year to see how we're tracking. But that's why these programs that you've put in place are so important to help those in need. Finally, or not finally, but continuing to the other source of funding after property taxes are estimated local receipts. And so it's a couple slides forward. There you go. So we use monies that we collect locally to help offset property tax increases. So as you can see on this chart, we are projecting, I'm looking at the shaded column FY26, 5,668,000 of local receipts to support this budget and $774,000 of state receipts to support the budget for a total of just under $6.5 million, which is pretty much on par with the prior year in total. This represents about 80% of our prior year actuals. So that's one of our financial management policies, that our goal is to start this budget process of our budget using between 80 and 85% of prior year actuals. So prior year actuals meaning fiscal year 24 was our last prior year, and that's a column on this page. Fiscal year 24 actual. You can see we actually collected 1,061,000 of motor vehicle excise tax, but we're budgeting 965. That's maintaining that conservatism. And the theory is, just based on history and experience, that in a modest economic downturn, we can expect 7 to 10% of these estimated receipts to decline. And in a more severe economic downturn, we can expect 15% plus to decline. So if you're consistently using 80 to 85%, even in a severe decline, you ought to be able to weather that storm for a year or two without having to make drastic cuts elsewhere. And so it's kind of the theory. In the meantime, this is also another item that generates free cash. And again, we repurpose that free cash, especially with the short-term rental receipts, as you see 4 lines down, 1,704,000 collected for FY24. It's the 24 results. The budget for 24 isn't shown there. It was a couple 100,000, but that's why we are proposing 1,375,000. It's basically the savings from the 24 budget to the 24 actual going into the wastewater stabilization fund.
A million
See
one.
that?
Yeah, I just realized I didn't put in the
Oh.
budget for FY24.
And it was 1,000,003.
The budget for 24 was a few $100,000 is tea time, Town Center Plaza, and a little bit of wastewater. The difference, it's the difference between 1,704,000 and 1,375,000. You can see for the current fiscal year we're in, we budgeted 1,160,000 because that's the 5-year wastewater planning bond came on board, and we used a significant amount of money of that short-term rental to pay for that debt service. And then what you also will see is that it's declining. And this is a key point. It's a financial planning point, and it'll be part of our wastewater funding discussion. And it's a technique that I've come up with that we've taxed at a certain level. And what I want to do to make everybody acclimated and comfortable at that level that they're at, but not worsen it, all things being equal. As water debt drops off, that we use less of the short-term rental receipts so that all things being equal, we'd be paying the exact amount of tax levy. Because if I use a short-term rental receipt to pay for the water bond, but then I don't have to, theoretically the tax would go down. But if the wastewater bonds are also ramping up and I maintain that balance, we can have a change in debt service, but no change in the tax levy. And what I'm trying to do is capture the debt drop off of the water so that when we have a big number of debt service coming on for wastewater, it's not going to be a big shock. Because then that's the point where we'll take the stepping down of that short-term rental tax and ramp it all the way back up again. And people will feel that impact positively. And so that's why you see all things being equal, if that was all wastewater debt, and it's not, but for sake of argument, if you had 1,160,000 and now you dropped 100, down to 1 million, that's because I'm stepping down the short-term rental to the extent that water debt is dropping off. And I have this all run out, but over several years. By the time the new wastewater debt comes on, we'll be down to using not much short-term rental receipts. But as soon as that wastewater debt hits, we'll ramp it all the way back up again. Was that your question, Bob?
It was, why did the short-term rental excise, actually, short-term rental, go down?
Right.
Question. All these slides.
And it gets a bit convoluted, and this is why we probably should we'll have a different discussion on wastewater funding. And it's actually a pervasive issue throughout the state, historically and even now, but I dealt with this 25 years ago with lots of towns. If you raise money to pay for exempt debt, that isn't property taxes. Because you therefore can't raise the same amount, the whole amount of property taxes. So if you need $10 million for debt and you have exempt debt, you could raise $10 million of property taxes. But if you say you're going to use $1 million of something else, you still can't raise $10 million. You can only raise $9 million of property taxes. So what happens is it becomes a default override if you double dip, so to speak. And so anytime we raise short-term rental money to pay for wastewater or water debt, since it's all exempt, that means we can't use property taxes to do that, even though we theoretically could.
Gary?
Yeah, just to make sure I understand, let's look at 988,000 in the budget for 2026. That's what you expect to receive and use in our budget from, and to use to pay water and so forth. And the rest that we would receive above 988 would go to free cash, therefore to the wastewater fund.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I just realized I have it over here on the left in the column. The short-term rental receipts budget, it's about halfway down, includes 715,000 of wastewater debt and 273,000 for Town Center Plaza.
Oh, I see it, yeah.
And if we were to get $1.7 million again in FY26, for sake of argument, and I'm just going to round it up for easy numbers, Gary, and
Right.
we budgeted $1 million, you'd have 700,000 of free cash going in that we would recommend in next year's budget, the FY27 budget, to go to the wastewater stabilization fund.
Okay,
So any savings and free cash generated from these things, we steward that and make sure we don't repurpose it and pull it in for other purposes. It stays for the purpose of wastewater.
right.
Best thing for wastewater is to keep that number as low as possible.
Yeah.
Now.
Well,
No.
even that further, this came into effect in FY18 or 19, Jacqui. And it wasn't $1.5 million or $1.7 million. It was, maybe 700,000, and then maybe $1 million, and then we went up from 4% to 6%, and then we hit the $1.5 million. But in those days, we didn't even have, we were using it to catch up on some things. We used it for the capital plan. We used it to fund reserves because we were so low on some of those things. And so now that we've caught up on all those things, now it's being repurposed for, this is probably the 4th year, I'm thinking, that's exclusively going into that wastewater stabilization fund. Because that was the intent of the short-term rental fees in the first place. The legislators considered it the state's contribution to us to fund wastewater. We don't expect any significant fee increases, and so these don't reflect any significant fee increases. As a matter of fact, I do see many of these accounts tightening as far as their receipts. And so I do think we have at this level, budgeting 80%, I think we're fine. But it wouldn't surprise me if I had nominal movement or even downward adjustment on some of these next year. There's some new legislation that passed that's going to limit the amount of penalties and interest that get charged to taxpayers. So that's been a significant number. So I'm trying to back off of that to reflect likely fewer earnings in that category, for example. And also, we no longer collect the cannabis host community fees. So we have never budgeted that, and we certainly aren't. Matter of fact, we're trying to step off on the excise tax that we get, the 3% that comes to us because of the increased competition and the number of stores opening up just to our west,
South,
whatever,
all around us.
southwest here. in other towns, we're used to be the only game. We were the first game in town if you're coming from the Upper Cape, and that's no longer the case. So I don't know for sure, but I expect that would be impacting sales and therefore the excise tax. So we do have some relatively small challenges, and usually it's a lagging indicator. But I am always very cautious, and I always keep an eye on the state issues 8 different commitments or billings for motor vehicle excise. I'm always curious what that first one looks like because it kind of is a bellwether for what the rest is going to look like. Because that's going to be that's our biggest area of sensitivity with local receipts, is we could see anywhere of if the economy is going bad, people aren't buying new cars. And as you all know, a new car pays a substantially higher excise tax than a 5-year-old car. And so people tend to keep their cars for a few extra years in a downtime. And you'll notice that in that excise tax. So. Okay, which brings us to our third and final funding source on the next page, what we call other available funds. And these are funds, the biggest one being the ambulance fund. We collect ambulance receipts, and that gets set aside into a separate ambulance fund. In our case, it needs to be appropriated by town meeting. It can be appropriated for any lawful purpose, but we typically use it to supplement the budget of the fire department salaries, and then use it for their capital plan. And so what you see in here is we did go up from 575,000 to 600,000 for the general fund support. And the ambulance fund, we do have another lease anticipated for an ambulance coming on board. We do have 3 ambulances now. The theory being we've run 2 for a long time, but if there's ever one down, now you only got 1, but we have a large number of concurrent calls, and it's a concurrent call nowadays, especially for a town in Eastham, isn't just, the 15, 20, 30 minutes that you're at the call. It involves the hour and a half or 2 hours up and back to the hospital. So if you have 1 ambulance, that's a little rough, and it puts a lot of wear and tear on the 2 ambulances. So last year, we decided to go to the 3 ambulance model so that we can spread out the mileage and always make sure we have a second ambulance to be able to respond. So, but that does have a cost as far as our ambulance fund. It does pay for those leases. So that's why you see that going up. One of the things we do, and it's in the detailed budget book that's online that you all got a link to, we do projections for all our other available funds to make sure that these funds can support what we're doing here, and they all do. So whether it's the ambulance fund, or the cable access fund, the waterways fund, those are all sufficiently funded to keep this level of support up going forward for the next several years. We do rely on the Community Preservation Act and the CPC to continue funding for 40,000, which was the administrative position for the CPC. We, at this point, don't know that we will be able to absorb that into the budget. We'd like to, at some point, get it in with our regular operating budget and lessen our support or support needed from the CPC, so they can repurpose it for things that projects they deem worthy. And then down below you see the free cash reserves in the for reserves and the free cash for capital. And I think from that, let's go to the summary of our appropriations. So that's how we fund the budget. This is what the budget looks like summarized. This provides for full funding of our collective bargaining agreements. I do want to point out, I think we generally pay our folks well, and of course everybody wants to make more money, but I think we do well, and that helps with retention. But one of the things that we really got back, which is a huge help to us, and this is why it's a negotiation, is they lowered the step increases. So we had market adjustments, but asked for that adjustment to get up to a certain level to decrease in some cases from high as 5.5% to 3%. So when you think about our budget can only go up 2.5% plus new growth, that essentially equals 3%. So if our steps are 3%, we're in line with being able to continue those on a recurring basis. Unfortunately, other costs go up more than 3%, and those become challenges. In this array of numbers by summary, so you see at top, the elected in general, it's essentially the reserve fund and select board stipends. Then we get into the departmental between town administrations, finance and operations, public safety. And you can see the increases in a dollar amount and percent on this chart by summary area. And then down below at the bottom of that chart, I summarize it a little bit differently, more like a functional. How much did salaries go up versus town expenses versus debt? A couple of key items in here. IT, under operations and finance, the big driver of that is IT costs. We've been making significant improvements in our IT environment, but also most companies nowadays are transitioning from what's called a CapEx model to a OpEx model, meaning that instead of big outlays on capital outlay, we pay a per seat, per person, per month cost. And it's part of a lease or an operating budget as opposed to a significant capital outlay that you reap the benefit of over a number of years. So as that world transitions to that model, IT costs, licensing costs do go up. And then the other big thing under public works is probably one of our largest increases. That is largely due to a new contract for disposal of municipal solid waste. And that kind of is what it is. There's not much we can do about that. It is an extension. So one of the things that we can control is how we approach them in the future when the extension is up. So it's a matter of, herding all the cats on the Outer Cape here and seeing if we can approach them collectively instead of individually. And so, that's the inside baseball of municipal government that you don't see, but there's a lot of work that goes into just getting people on the same page, see if we can get a better deal.
How long is that contract good for?
It's will be 4 more years after this calendar or last calendar year.
Can I ask a brief question?
Hmm.
We haven't talked about, well, I've been here, but has the town considered pay as you throw? And I'm not saying that I necessarily want to consider it. It's just a question.
We have, the recycling committee proposed it quite a few years ago, 8 years ago, maybe. They looked at it and just didn't have the support to do it.
The support from the town,
Yeah,
the
I
town.
don't think I
peop-
was on,
town
I wasn't
people?
on the board then. I was on the finance committee, but they didn't have the support of the select board,
Yeah,
I think, to change the structure to pay as you throw.
That being said, everything's always on the table.
it's on the table.
So we can consider things like that.
I
Fred,
did that analysis.
what's that?
I did that analysis 8 years ago.
And it was just horrible, Fred? Was that it?
No, it wasn't horrible.
I think it was more of a political hot potato.
Mhm.
And we were in the throes of getting water through.
Hmm.
And so really my recommendation to the board back then was that while I think it would reduce our tonnage and it would reduce our costs in lieu of the fact that we knew this contract increase was coming, with the water meetings we were having that were so acrimonious, adding paper throw on that, but it just wasn't worth it. at the
Yeah, and it
time.
was still pretty new in Wellfleet
Yeah.
and Brewster and other towns that were
Yeah.
doing it. Now that they've had it for a while, that's,
No, the numbers are there, and I think,
Right.
it's still a political hot potato, and now you've got wastewater coming along, so do you wanna add, paper
Right.
throw on top of that, or you wanna just suck up the increase for a couple of years?
But one of the things I like, and when all you folks individually meet with me, if you have a conversation, I think one of the things I probably tell you is, we welcome everybody's ideas, but let's work it through our plan, right? So if you want to do a pay for throw or any other program, that's great. But let's work it through and phase it into the plan, not just decide ad hoc to do it this year because we want to do it this year. So, or we could do that too, but whatever you guys decide what you want to do. But, my recommendation is phase these things in through part of the plan. The other key thing I want to point out on this array of numbers is under unallocated. It's going up 1.76%. And that's a reflection of a few things. Some favorable information. In that is Barnstable County Retirement Assessment. And I'm hoping I don't get surprised, but the preliminary data we got for their assessment is actually a decrease, which hugely helped. But I'm not sure I understand why. And so I need to,
Mistake.
and I don't think, no, they're pretty good. So I'm not sure that, but there's a reason there I need to understand better. Just to make me feel good. Also unallocated is our energy budget. So electricity and natural gas. And those costs have increased, but we had a pretty good increase in last year's budget to accommodate those rate increases. But concurrent with that, we've also been doing many green communities projects that we're starting to see some benefit from. And at some point, I need to work with Mira in our office and accumulate that data and do a presentation. I know the Climate Action Committee is interested in this, the effectiveness of some of these programs, but my sense of it is that has reduced energy consumption and therefore is lowering our costs. So even though there ought to be an increase in the energy budget, it's moderated by the decrease in usage. And so I think that's a positive. And likewise, on our health insurance, we're taking a little bit of a gamble here, but if anyone is to go back and look at the FY24 year-end review, the biggest generator of free cash and savings in our appropriations budget was health insurance, which is pretty typical in most towns because it's most volatile. It's also prone to the most increase in any one year. National trend on premiums is 8 to 11%. We belong to a self-insured health group. We self-insure, and that group does a good job of managing claims. They have an active health and wellness program. They have a prescription rebate program. They have a foreign prescription purchasing program, and they actually hired a prescription expert to make sure that we're getting that those prescriptions that are being issued are managed and monitored. So if somebody's getting X, is Y an alternative type of thing? And that has proven to be pretty valuable to that health group. And so the health group also has, through our many years of participation in it, a substantial surplus. And they have a fund balance policy that says you should have X amount of surplus to manage working capital. And to the extent they're over that, they use that to buy down or subsidize the rates that they pass along to us. And we've been a beneficiary of that, and we are going to continue to be for this upcoming year. And then finally, one of the things we put in, I think I mentioned to you last year's budget, we've always had the ability to, but hadn't offered high deductible health plans. And that's not a solution for some or a lot of folks, but it's a great answer for other folks. And so we began pushing that. The first year we implemented it, I think we had 7 people sign up. This year we're, I think 24, 25, something of that magnitude. And that has about a 20% savings from a traditional plan from that for our premium, as well as the employee saving money. So it's a win-win for everybody, if it's a fit for your needs. And so combination of all those factors, health insurance ought to be going up probably 7.5%. I think we've got it at about 3 or so, reflecting those positive changes. So those are a couple elements of good news. And if we go to the next page, we get into the capital budget. This just shows a summary of the capital budget. And of course, on our financial planning page, there is a very detailed capital budget book that details all these elements in the 5-year plan. But this does address all our needs. And as you can see in the bottom summary of requests, and you added all these up, most of these are for recurring needs for fleet, equipment, and facilities. There is a big amount for landings, culverts, and drainage and some infrastructure, but those are largely funded by outside grants from NRCS, the National Conservation Group that sends us grants. And so we're able to get a lot of this engineering and planning work done through grants. And when we are ready to do implementation, we'll have to be on the hook for a piece of it. But if it's stormwater related, hopefully our grant will cover that. And we also have the opportunity to get other grants otherwise, like through the Seaport Council. And so we do actively pursue grant opportunities for these large items. And that's what I really kind of hope to convey here. We aren't anticipating any borrowing for the regular routine things. And we don't anticipate any capital exclusion. So free cash being generated is being put to good use in our opinion. Which brings us to the next
I
slide.
have a question.
A really quick
Suzanne.
question. It says community internet. And I
Yep.
was wondering if you could remind us what that is.
Yeah, that's been a pet project of mine that I haven't been able to further too much. And I was never going to ask for taxpayer money. That's why it's listed as grant funded.
Yeah.
The dream would be to have wireless capability throughout town so that you could have a, it's called a wireless mesh network,
Mhm.
and potentially have the opportunity to offer Wi-Fi to our residents at a reduced cost versus a third party or private provider, Comcast. But I could probably spend, most of my time doing that, and that'd be the only thing I did. But we have done a couple of things, and we have extended fiber optic cabling to Tea Time. That was on a grant, and to the Windmill Green. So now we have the ability to, if we have events, we can get wireless to those sites. And I also had to bring it up to a distribution box in Brackett Road, so we can extend it down once we get to the point of redeveloping Tea Time in Town Center Plaza. So that was ended up being about just under 100. It was like 70 something thousand of grant we got to do those little pieces, parts of it.
Nice.
And then, again, this is reserved for its own topic, I believe, but borrowing projects that are potentially contemplated at town meeting is wastewater plan implementation. I've got a placeholder there of 160 million. No guarantees that that's what it is. That's what we're fleshing out right now, and hopefully we'll have another month and a half, maybe, a better, more well-documented number as to what that is. But we have just now, after the holidays, started doing outreach. You might have noticed a wastewater implementation, which asked people to provide questions. We got 15 questions already.
On day one.
Yeah, I saw that email. It was great. Yeah.
So, the questions are probably what we would have expected. Now we got to, talk with the Capital Projects Committee, the Finance Committee, and yourselves. And what's the best, we know what the response is to some of them, but some things we need to flesh out with all of you to make sure we're all on the same page and understanding what we're doing. So this really deserves its own whole thing, but I put it on there as it is part of the budget. Which brings us to the end. Next slide.
And
I guess not the end. This is the reserves. This is, as I told you, I guess the bottom here, I think this is the long and short of it. The bottom box here shows the current balance in each of our reserve funds and what we're recommending be added to each of them, which would show you the ending balance. And so if we do that, we will keep our stabilization fund about where we want it, or unrestricted stabilization fund at about 6%. And we continue progress on funding OPEB. A lot of times we get questions about OPEB. Why aren't we funding more? Well, we can fund as much as anybody wants to fund. But the question is, what are you not doing because you're doing that? So it's a matter of priority, right? And that's a 30-year problem where we've got, today and next year problems to sort. So, it's a fair question and a fair debate, but, that's kind of why we continue to fund, plug away at it, but not overdoing it on the OPEB. Okay, and then finally, the final slide.
Terry had a question.
Yeah, the OPEB funds, that's with that group, the Plymouth, is it?
It's
Plymouth
a
Group
Plymouth
or-
County trust fund, but it's managed by a professional investment manager, similar to the way a pension fund would be.
So the 950 shows whatever we put in plus the growth that we've
Yes.
had. Thanks.
And so the final slide, one more, guys. There you go. Here's our challenges that we got. Special education costs, a month ago, I didn't really know as much as I know now. But I do anticipate that to be an ongoing issue again this year. I know the schools just came out with their budget workshop meeting, I think Tuesday, which will give us some more insight. But now I've got our stuff done, I will start focusing on, what are the schools looking like? But schools are going to continue to be a challenge for all the towns in the district, but even more so for Wellfleet and Eastham, because we have enrollment shift similar to what we had last year. Whereas even if their budget stays the same, but we have a higher level of participation, our assessment would go up because we are paying at a higher percent. And so that will continue to be a challenge.
Jerry has questions.
Is that, we've decreased less than others or we've just increased, we have many more students and the others have stayed the
We're
same?
growing.
Well, that shows there's some positive with the
And
fact that
actually,
we're
the
growing for
most
families.
surprising number this year is that Brewster is down 20 students, I think, or 20 something.
Okay. Well, it's nice to know we have more families. I know it increases costs for the education, but that's a plus.
Well, the good news, I know people don't like to see it, but it's, it's good to me. We have a beautiful facility as a high school, and they're gonna have amazing programs. And, just like we've got an amazing library and a great fire department, and great police department, so, and that school is gonna last us for decades, right?
I
We're
won't
gonna
have to
make
worry
sure it
about
does.
On the municipal side, they weren't such budget busters this year, but they traditionally are and will continue to be, health insurance, pension, utility, and collective bargaining. So I'll wrap up there. I did say at the beginning, this was the third year of our general override because we did collective bargaining. Later this year in 25, after town meeting, after fiscal year 26 starts, we'll have to start collective bargaining again. That will be impactful to the 27 budget. And, we'll see how that goes. But, I know where our employees will start, which would be, more, and then we'll have to see where we end up. But, if that gets to the point, I would imagine a similar process that if the town and the community wants to approve these contracts, because we're recommending them to them, and we think they're ought to be approved, then the community at town meeting needs to know the cost. And that would be an override to cover the cost for the full 3 years so we're back in that vicious cycle of this doing all over again. But
And we have schools are this year, their contracts? No.
Schools
No.
were last
They
year,
were last year.
year.
They were last year. Okay,
Yes.
all right.
and they don't do all of theirs at once, I don't think. So last year there were teacher contracts. I don't know.
All right.
Well, they might do like their steel, don't they have a steel
They have like
workers or?
custodial union.
Yeah, but teachers is the largest.
Teachers is the largest
Not,
group.
yeah.
Okay.
so I apologize for going on for a bit, but that's the long and short summary of it all. Finance committee will be going through the details, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, you can't just throw $50 million at us and,
And you
say, this
timed
is
it
what
to
it is
December,
without some
so-
explanation. So
Right.
we understand
A
that
lot of money.
it does take a little bit to explain where it's all going and where it's coming from.
I think Mary.
I'm gonna let finance committee ask. Mary?
Thank you, Rich. I have sort of a basic question, and you have indicated in this budget that we are in good shape, so as far as overrides are concerned, but at the same time, as we've just been discussing, we don't know the final numbers for the schools. And I was just wondering if you had at any time thought about what we would have to cut if we needed to cut in order to not have an override, and what the ramifications of that would be as far as the total budget is concerned.
Right, so Mary's right. This budget doesn't contemplate any overrides, but that's just basically looking at the municipal side because we don't really have any insight up until more recently and control over the education budget. And we certainly don't have much control over assessments based on enrollments. So we provide money for them, and this budget provides for a 3% increase, but likely to be something more than that. So what's the order of magnitude of more? Well, as you saw, we have excess levy capacity of 43,000. So if that was the only about more,
That's not gonna do it.
and the only thing that happened, then we'd absorb that. So then you
Go
get
down
to,
like 30, well, no, not excess levy, but free cash left when you're at like 30 some thousand left free cash.
yeah. So, to Mary's point, what are we gonna do when the number comes in more than we could absorb without making adjustments? And that's a subsequent discussion. At the moment, I think we ought to progress on what we have, but I would ask each finance committee member, each select board member to contemplate how do you want to approach funding shortages? I have lots of ideas, and I think that would be a good discussion to have individually. Because if you need to discuss it at a board, I want to present a well thought
Proposal,
out
yeah.
comprehensive thing that I know that you can support. But we have $400,000 of capital, of tax levy going to capital. If you were in a pinch and needed money and you didn't want to fund it through an override, you could cut that and use more free cash. I mean, that's, in my mind, a short-term fix, but a longer-term problem. You have human service contracts that aren't necessarily part of our core service, or maybe you think they are. And we could talk about those. But then once you go through a handful of things that are relatively benign and easy, then you get into hard things. And it's there's no half really doing this. You got to tell us the programs you don't think you need
The services.
in the services. And nobody's going to like them. This is why, it's probably good to have a conversation one-on-one so we understand the impacts of some of these things. But some towns, this is no way what I'm suggesting to you, just telling you what it was like in Yarmouth. There were very tight budget hawks. We knew if we had a budget problem, the select board wanted to close the libraries and lay off the COA on a temporary basis, expecting that, a year later, they'd all just magically come back.
Yeah.
Hey,
It's
Jamie's
something
having
to talk about.
trouble logging in. Rich, I don't know if you see her at all on,
I'll promote her.
She said the meeting ID isn't working.
I just promoted her to a panelist.
oh, you
Oh,
did?
okay,
Oh,
good.
She must have.
We were just busy chatting.
Paul is on and Roy.
Yeah.
See it.
She didn't come in though.
Not in yet.
Shut the door for her.
But I think that, the long answer to that, Mary, is, as we get numbers in from the schools, then we have to talk about it and we have to figure out whether, we have a list that we want to cut, what the next
Depending
steps
upon them, how we want to
Exactly.
proceed.
Yeah, so the example last year was
are.
$1,020,000.
$1,020,000.
The gap was just too large.
Cutting $1,020,000 out of our municipal budget would have really savaged the services we offer. And it wasn't something that the board or the finance committee wanted to do. So we did an override for it. But like I say, it's nice to have a plan. Part of that plan is at some point in the future, hopefully these special education costs will reduce. Maybe the enrollment shift will shift back to other communities. And as we have those reductions, don't just retake those savings and add them to new things. Put them in a school stabilization fund. So we did that with caveats, right? And so I'd suggest maybe we would probably do something similar, but our caveats might change this year. So we have to see how that shakes out.
Any other questions for Rich on the budget? Wow, did a good
go.
job. Not many questions. Thank you. Thank you.
There'll be more to
Very good.
come.
There'll be more,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you,
Can I
Rich.
make one comment on?
Sure.
Okay. Oh, well, one, you guys do a great job, and I always find it very interesting that of all the taxes we pay, this is probably the most detailed information that you're going to get on how your taxes are spent, and possibly the most like direct service of, oh, this goes to beach, fire, rec, the schools. Because when you're paying your federal taxes, you do not get that level of detail, and you do not get the same quality of accounting as there's major departments on the federal level that don't pass their audits.
Right.
So I think it's very interesting and just great to be able to see where it actually goes and then be like, oh, right. I do value that service.
Right.
And I know it is a lot, and people paying your taxes is a lot. But as Rich said, when it comes down to it and you're like, what would you cut? I think a lot of people in town faced with that question would also be like, oh,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
so just maybe if that makes anyone feel a little bit better about paying their taxes, is that I think there's a lot of value in it at the local level, so.
Yeah, we just spent a lot of time on education. I just want to point out to everyone that it's the largest single item in our budget, over 13 million. So it's important and it's something that our control is less than it is for other items in the budget. But that's the easiest way to put it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Rich. It was very, very detailed, very informative. Remember the first few budget presentations I sat through with Sheila, it was deer in the headlights. I sort of glazed over because she went through it like 20 minutes, I
Yeah,
think was
15
her,
minute,
yeah,
yeah.
15, 20 minutes. And oh my God. I was like, I will never understand this. But
But you did.
I'm there now, finally, after 14 of these, you know.
That's good.
All right. Do you want to stay? FinCom?
I should probably adjourn, and then if people would like to stay, they can stay.
There you
and if
go.
They don't wish to stay, they can depart.
All right.
So I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make it.
All in favor of adjourning?
All right.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you all for coming
Thank you. Yes.
on virtually also. You had a full,
Yeah, Roy
yeah,
and Paul.
yes, great. All right, next we have opening of the town warrant. I guess we need to read the public notice. The warrant for Eastham Annual Town Meeting to be held on Monday, May 5th, 2025. Opens Monday, January 13th, and will close Monday, February 24th, 2025 at 4 p.m. That seems like a long time, but I guess it's not 5 weeks.
Yeah, 5 weeks. It's
Okay.
maybe a little bit longer, a couple of days longer than normal.
We don't need to vote, do we, to open the warrant?
Nope.
No. Okay,
Okay.
it's open. All right, next we have town clerk fee addition.
Mhm.
They would like to add or raise the amount. What, do we remember, know what it was before?
It was
Didn't
8.
say.
Whose notices?
The 9, which is lined with now the billing.
8 something,
department.
8 and change.
Okay,
But
Yeah,
should we make it consistent with the other?
right. We did, I remember both Jamie and I mentioned that we thought postage rates keep going up when we were talking about the building
Yeah.
Butters.
fee, and I don't know if it was, I thought we
talked about
suggested
10.
going to 10.
10.
we did.
And I don't think we've decided that, but I think the thing to agree on here is whatever we do vis-à-vis the building of butters certified mail, we should do for
Same.
the town
Yeah,
clerk.
and I can't
Make
remember
them
whether it
the
was
same. It
9.50.
was, I think they
We've talked about
suggested
10.
9 and we talked about going to 10.
Right.
So I think that we haven't really done the final fees.
So
vote
you
on that.
could vote to make it consistent with the building, other butters notice, other departments. of butters.
Yes.
Okay, I move that we make the fee for
Clerk's office.
the clerk's office, the abutters notices be the same as those for the abutters notices for the building department, et cetera.
So moved, yeah.
That was his motion, so you can second.
Second.
Okay.
Good.
Any more discussion on that? All right, all in favor?
Yep.
We'll call the roll. Jamie? If she's there? If she's listening. Jamie, are you there?
She's
You're
muted.
muted right now.
Hi, sorry, aye.
Okay. Bob?
Aye.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Jerry?
Yes.
Myself, aye. 5-0.
Okay.
All right, next, RTE follow-up. So I asked Jacqui to put this on the agenda. This is gonna be a bombshell to a bunch of people. Just preface with that. But after that vote last Monday, it didn't feel good. It didn't sit right with me. I went home. I even mentioned something to Jamie as we were leaving. I said, that's the last time I'm gonna vote.
Mhm.
Against implementing the RTE. And I went home and the more I thought about it, I really just didn't feel good about it. And I talked to Jamie a bit and I reread all the letters to and, pro and con. And, really, really solidified that I am gonna support it come August. And I know it's kind of a bombshell to you guys, and I'm sorry I didn't come to that decision last Monday, when we were all here, but I figured the sooner the better, that to correct it. And, I was in Jacquie's office Tuesday morning as she came in, waiting for her to talk to her about it, and she was a bit surprised, I have to admit, as was Rich. And, it doesn't change that there's gonna have to be a lot of discussion before August. We really have to, help get this implemented. I know that's why Rich wanted us to decide in January, because there's gonna be a lot of work getting people signed up and qualified for this. And I know it's a blow. I'm gonna, here, some of my reasons, I wrote them down because there's a lot of moving parts to this. And I think one of the big things is, so much has changed since we set that 60-40 policy. Values have gone up a lot, so it actually is a bigger impact for people. It's more money, even though like their house values have gone up, doesn't mean they have more money in their pockets. So I think the impact, looking at what someone would get as a resident, is a much bigger impact for them. And I think it will help a lot of people. The use of second homes has changed so much. I mean, we had, our housing report in the fall, I believe we went in the last 10 years or so from over 400 year-round rentals of single-family homes, somewhere around, down to around 80 now. So we lost all that inventory to short-term rentals. And I know not everyone, not all second homeowners do short-term rentals. A lot of them are here, the bulk of the summer and weekends, and they're very, present in our community, but not all of them, and certainly not, such a big number that we don't have a lot of short-term rentals, because we do have a lot of short-term rentals. The fairness issue, I weighed that a lot with what Jerry said, but it's never gonna be fair, like he said, no matter how high you go up.
Right.
And the fact that right now it's 55-45, and I know the part-time resident group is gonna be pretty upset about this, but I can't imagine if it was 60-40 or higher than that part-time, that they'd be any less upset. I think the more their numbers increase, the more, they're gonna have a problem with it. So, and again, I apologize for bringing it up, late. Jerry, should I say something?
No need to apologize, Amy. There are five people, on the board. It's not one, there's no czar, and it's how the votes go. I just want to say one other thing, just for you to think about at some point. Last Monday, I talked about my government major at Wesley, and today I'll talk about my second major, my economics major. I went back, because I knew this was coming up. I went back and looked at the information that Richard brought. And so we would give the average, the average homeowner about an $800 net, $800 savings with the 20% that Richard brought. And that had a shift of $3.1 million of taxes. Now, unlike Truro and P-Town and Wellfleet, we have that great taxpayer fund that we have. If we put $600,000 into that, we could give 600 families $1,000 with a net of $900 benefit. And I just think that's a more efficient use of spending taxpayer shifts. That's all. And
I hear you. And
that's another,
it's still gonna
I
be
didn't
not
say
enough.
that.
It's still gonna be not enough for a lot of people to be able to stay in their homes and afford to live here. So I think we're still gonna need other programs, like the community fund. to help with that. And
Yeah,
we,
I'd like to
Bob?
weigh into, I don't mean to interrupt.
oh, no, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going down that same path as Jerry that, and talking to Rich about it too. You had proposed a $300,000 community fund startup. If we looked at what's going on with the RTE, I kind of look at it as it's assumption based, right? We've assumed that, and I'm sure that there are a number of people who need the money. But we're making assumptions about that. And with a $1.8 million as the cutoff, but I don't see a lot of people with $1.5 million homes needing that money. You know, I don't,
I mean, housing values have gone up so
Yeah.
drastically. People who,
Yeah.
you know, inherited a home, say,
Right.
and, you
Yeah.
know,
but I
Yeah.
also think that, the qualification for something like this shouldn't be part-time or full-time. It should be needs-based. And I would rather see, you know, people, first of all,
Don't think we should.
there's a pretty onerous application process for this RTE. And I know Suzanne was raising that last time.
not for the RTE there isn't, it's more for the other one, income qualified ones, there's more onerous.
Oh, I thought there was.
Because RTE, you just have to be on the census and
No, you-
establish,
You need to submit documentation, including a redacted version of your tax return. We don't qualify income, but we do require the tax return. Motor vehicle excise bill paid to Eastham, disclosure of any other residential properties owned in the last 2 years anywhere, because we got to verify that you're not a resident of there. So there's a bit of work to it, and there's a couple other things I'm probably forgetting. Not as pervasive as those things, so,
And it will have an application, a basic application as well.
yes.
It seemed to have a whole lot more requirements than the form that Rich, Jamie and I drafted for the application for the tax help out of the community
well,
fund.
that was the policy.
No, it was just the way we drafted a form to apply for that money. It was a lot easier than the application process for the RTE based upon the requirements that you needed to submit. What was it? A whole bunch of paperwork associated with it. So anyway, I'm much more of a needs-based. That's just my philosophy on it. Now, that being said, I'm sure it's gonna help a lot of people. And, you know, this is, as Jerry would say, democracy in action, right?
Yep.
But, just going on the record that I don't think that it's just a fairness issue on general principles. I think it's also financially, more appropriate to target the people, find the people who are struggling. The objective of this, I think, is to lighten the financial burden on the people in town who are struggling. And I think what'll happen, you know, what we're assuming here based on this assumption-based process, you know, most, if not all of the full-time people need the money more than most, if not all of the part-time people.
Well, we did have a survey that I believe, did Climate Action do that survey that we had in our packets last week?
Mhm.
That showed financial security
I
and
saw
how
it,
people
yeah.
answered, and it was
Yes.
drastically different for
was a-
year round.
It was, but what
So-
we're saying is all,
True.
we're saying
True.
all. And
Well, maybe it'll be like in, you know, well, and we can advocate for this, is that people who don't need it and get it,
Take it.
not only, well, they can take it, but then they could donate that money to a local community
Charity.
fund
Yeah.
or something like what happened with stimulus money. I mean, a lot of people gave stimulus money. You look at Lower Cape Outreach, homeless prevention, their budgets exploded during COVID.
yeah.
For a lot of people that
donate-
didn't need that
Right.
stimulus money donated it. And, you know, maybe we can get that grassroots group in here to organize
Mhm.
and advocate for things like that, for people to, yes, apply, but also to use that money then to help locals.
Yeah, again, I agree that some of those people would be stepping up and donating that money. And, you know, we're all probably donating money to California right now through the Red Cross or something like that. It's not a question of goodwill of citizens. It's a question really of, in my mind, financial and ethical fairness. And, you know, even all the taxes we pay for federal and state taxes are based upon income.
Right.
So,
And that's where property's strange, is that it doesn't care, property tax doesn't care how much money you make. It just looks at how much your house is worth,
Mhm.
which is a very skewed, like I said, housing prices have gone up so much, people's incomes haven't gone up.
well, I retired on $2017. And since then, you know, everything's either half or 100% more expensive than
Right.
it was
Yeah.
6, 7 years ago. So I understand that, but I do think it's just my personal opinion is that it should be more needs-based. And I think we have a process in place for identifying that.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the number of people on the tax rolls, I think who were in trouble with their taxes, it was something less than 200 people, about 180 people who were had either been late, and within that, some subset being more than, you know, a month or 3 months late, whatever we look at. I think it was about 180 people, but if we doubled that, if we made it 300 people, and we ended up with, this was why I started this with, I was going down the same path you were, Jerry. If we ended up with a $300,000 community fund and 300 people showing, you know, the real need, we'd end up with $1,000 per family or per person. We'd
I
end up
understand, but we
totally
unfortunately
target-
would have to, at this point, do an override to fund that. amount.
No overrides needed to put.
But we
money-
don't have that money in free cash.
Right.
So we would have to have an override.
No,
We only have 170,
no, the law doesn't record an override.
if we have it in free cash, Jerry. We can't just make up money. We have to
No.
have it in free cash. to
So
be
let me
able
just
to-
clarify it. So we have about 191,000 of unspent free cash. So we have that. And we have, what Jerry's saying is the special legislation is written such that an appropriation of the community fund is added on top of our levy. It's outside of our levy limit, just like our debt for water and wastewater are. So we could add, it would obviously have a impact, but we don't need a vote via an
I see.
override,
Yeah, that's all.
a town
Still be a
meeting.
tax increase.
It would, yes. That's
So,
why I said the net was different, but you're right.
but I
Where-
know there is a problem with a lot of, like Suzanne was talking about, funds where people have to apply, income qualify and things like that. Maybe they're in the middle where they don't qualify, but yet they are struggling.
Mhm.
So, you know, that community fund is good for that. But the other people that are slipping through the cracks that maybe don't have time to even apply for, you know, a needs-based thing.
Mhm.
You know, and some people are too proud to take a handout.
Some people are too proud, and also you're leaving the decision about whether or not you think someone needs something in someone else's hands, which if you need programs or need assistance, and there's lots of programs and lots of assistance out there, but like you have your pile of papers and you did all the applications and you're just like hoping some person doesn't tell you you're denied. And so I appreciate wanting it to be needs-based, but also you then have to like realize that you are trying to make the decision for another person on what they might need. And I know that we kind of do that policy-wise. Like
doing
we
it
do that, we do it anyway, but it just, there are already so many programs that do that, that it is
Yeah.
kind of nice to possibly offer one that doesn't do that. And it is the tool we have, you know,
Right, and
it would
it's-
be great if we had some other tools, but it's one that we
And
have.
even, you know, the state felt that RTE is such a great tool for seasonal communities that they upped it to 50% for seasonal communities even. Not that we would jump into something like that, but
Yep.
so we have a lot to talk about between now and August. A lot of work to do to get people online with this. We have to come up with application procedures and things like that, and then get the word out.
Staffing, maybe.
Rich, can we wait till August on this?
No, that's why we.
Oh, no.
That's
I
why
mean,
we do it
can we-
now, so he's
But
built up.
can we wait to do an official vote till August?
It is, the
Yes.
official vote is in August.
Okay,
This is just a general, there's now 3 of us
okay.
that want to do it. So they need to know that now.
Right, that's what I
So
said.
they
Yeah,
can
that
gear
to
up.
get started, right, to gear up. But the official vote is August. We won't set any rate. Whether it's 10, 20% or higher
Do you have staff for this?
until August.
Amy, if I may.
Certainly.
If I may, just so now we're here, what does this look like implementing it, right? So the vote doesn't happen until August or September when we have our classification hearing. But we need to know now because the biggest impact, and there's a lot of complexity here, so I'm trying to make this simple. We need to know as many people that want to apply and take advantage of this before tax bills get set and sent out. Just think of it as a net zero. If we know everybody that wants it, we know the total amount of levy that needs to be shifted to take from those people and to add to the others that aren't going to get it. And the net impact of that is zero and we get our tax levy. The problem is in the first year of implementation, and since I knew this was coming, I did have a chance to do a little bit of research with several communities. And I'm sticking with my 60%. Tisbury, that recently implemented just for this year, had a tremendous outreach effort. And they only got up to 63% of participation. So I have been estimating, and that means 40, using 60%, our goal. We're going to do a tremendous job too, I have no doubt about it. But I'm going to stick with 60%, being a little bit conservative, which means that 40% of the people that are eligible to receive this, it won't be reflected on the tax bills when they go out, which means when they come in after, we need to be able to fund that because it's not reflective in the tax bills between the residents and the non-residents. And the way you fund that is by increasing your overlay account. And I probably should have pointed it out in our budget presentation, but on that budget summary, every year, and if you look at, I think it's the third page, you'll see there's an amount for overlay. We always have it because that's how we pay for elderly and veteran benefits and exemptions. And it's how we pay for blind exemptions, or if anybody needs an abatement because we overvalued their house, that's what you use to pay for it. And we also use that to build our balance of our general fund and maintain a certain level of general fund balance. And it's probably more than we need, but not egregiously more than we need. So my recommendation is if you're going to do this, we need to add to our overlay an amount of money to account for those 40% of people that are not going to have their applications in on time to get everything reflected on the bills. And of course, 40% of a smaller number is smaller and 40% of a bigger number is bigger. So I have something for you and I'll send it out on email.
Yeah, so if we go for like a 10%,
And I think this will be, probably a good discussion for another night, but I just want to
Definitely.
preface this with you.
yeah.
Because this
I
is
didn't wanna
why we
get
need
too
to
deep
know,
in the weeds,
because
but-
by March, if we know what we're doing in March, even if you change your mind again and say we're not doing it, that's okay, but at least we have what we need in case somebody says we are doing it.
In August.
Because if we waited until August and we had basically 2 weeks to get this all, our participation would be, 5%.
Because we have a couple
And
thousand.
everything would have to be on overlay.
Mm.
And so that's why this 6 months is so important, is to try to get hopefully 60%. And so what I did here is this 1-page update to the RTE presentation shows where we are 55-45, and it shows the cost and impact to residents and non-residents at each increment in 5% increments. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and 35%. And down on the bottom in orange is my estimate in that first year of how much money we would need on our overlay. So meaning that 5% increment, it's just under $200,000 would be needed to be added to our budget, to our in our overlay line to fund the 40% that don't get it in on time. That would drop over time. The second year, we would have a better participation rate up front, and probably by the third year, we'd probably be where we're going to be. And that's why I have a secondary amount, a ongoing 3%
That was you. Okay.
that would be needed on an ongoing basis, year over year, to account for those, there's always going to be some
Yeah,
folks that
it
don't.
really speaks to probably why other towns start low and build
Right.
up. They don't start, nobody starts at 35 or,
Amy?
Jerry?
Rich, just explain, so how do we fund the overlay? No, because this should be a net, a net, close to a net zero. I mean, I'm expecting a drop in assessments, the taxable assessment for the 40% or 45% full-time residents. And so I set that up and then I set the tax rate so that I'm getting the money, the funds from the 45, the 55% part-timers. And if fewer people apply for the residential tax exemption, I'm going to get more money than I thought because I'm going to get the full amount of taxes that I'm charging the part-timers
This kind of goes
from
to
those that don't, from those
Bob's
that don't.
comment. You know, it's assumption based, right? We can't presume what we think we know the residents are. Because if we presume that, you're shifting more levy than you might have to.
Mhm.
And that extra levy is going to non-resident taxpayers and you're overcharging them. And so that's why the state law requires an application process to verify residency. So we need to verify residency and we need to do it before the tax bill goes out so that we can take the people that have applied, take that amount of levy and shift it to others.
Okay, but if I don't apply,
Right.
if I don't apply, why, am I still eligible for that year? If
Yes.
I apply
Yes.
late?
Yes,
Yes.
up to April 1st.
And if you
Oh.
pay your taxes, then we have to pay you back.
No, now I understand. I thought we can't do a cutoff. Here's where we're at. Here's.
Right.
You could do a
You
cutoff
gotta wait
April
till-
1st.
You gotta wait till next year. That's not.
So Jamie has to go, so I thought I'd recall the vote for,
Oh, okay.
just for now, for who's in favor of implementing the RTE come August.
You need a motion for that or is
No.
this?
I think I didn't do a motion last
No, I
time.
don't
This
think
is
so.
more of a
What do you
consensus vote.
consensus? Yeah.
So Jamie,
Aye.
Bob,
Not in favor.
Suzanne,
Yes.
Jerry,
No.
and I'm a yes, 3-2. So I'm sure we'll be discussing this
Oh, yeah.
a lot more and
Makes life interesting.
the part-time residents have a meeting coming up in
The 5th.
5th of February, which I plan to attend and
No, thank you.
it's
That is
Zoom.
Zoom.
Oh.
Zoom.
that's-
Safely a Zoom meeting.
Jamie's got her
Is
hand
that
up.
better?
Oh, Jamie?
Jamie has her hand up.
Hi. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. No, I appreciate everybody, being so open tonight and discussing this. And I do think that, like Amy said too, there's a lot more to discuss as far as ironing out the details. And I don't think it's something that'll get done in a night. It's going to take a little while. But I appreciate everyone's openness tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Mary?
Rich, could you, Rich, could you email that form that you've just passed out to the select board, to the
Absolutely.
members of the finance committee, please?
Can I ask maybe an easy question?
Sure.
Municipalities that have this in place, is there like an easy online, is there an online form?
I
Do
believe
they-
that's, yeah.
And then
we
also,
talked
do you
about that.
have it as like a feature in your accounting software?
So we don't have as a feature yet. We'll have to buy a bridge. That's one of the costs of doing it.
Okay,
So it's $8,500. We already did that outreach
okay,
to modify our software to accommodate this. We do anticipate having an online application form,
Okay.
but there are things you need to submit, like your tax returns, et cetera. And so each, we'll make that easy too. Obviously, someone's gonna have to scan in or attach a PDF,
Mhm.
but we'll have, here's where you put in your tax return. So regardless of what you name it, it's your
Right.
tax return. Here's where you put in your excise bill. So we're
Awesome.
making this as easy as possible
okay,
because we want to get as much participation as possible before the bills go out.
okay.
And obviously we'll have to do a lot of reminders and alerts and.
And I've already talked, so we have a whole idea of communications plan, sending of postcards as a initial, sending of letters, to those that we think might be eligible, posting on social media. So we'll do a lot of outreach. But, other towns have done that too. And like I said, the highest participation they got was 63%. So despite all those efforts.
Such is the way of these things.
Mhm.
Can I ask a question, Amy?
Oh, certainly. Hi, Peter.
Rich, does the state require an application or just verification of residency?
It's an application and verification of residence. That's what the application is, to give us the documentation we need to verify residency.
So if it's just.
It's also,
verify
just
the-
add verify residency and to verify that they're not eligible in another community and also taking it there.
But it doesn't, it's not an application that, it seems like, you're saying that some people won't apply, won't want it and won't apply for it.
Mhm.
But does the state get involved in that? Can't you just make it so all the residents get the exemption and then the non-residents don't? And so you don't have to go through this 60% applying for it thing.
And perhaps you could do that if you think you had a valid criteria of everybody that was actually a resident. But what do you do with the people that said, oh, by the way, I was a resident, but you didn't count me? Or the counter argument being, I'm a non-resident. You assumed all these people are residents and therefore you overcharged me. You open up a big can of worms if you don't do your due
We
diligence.
have to be able to prove who's a resident. and
The
who's
heavy lifting is just proving who's
Yes.
a resident. It's not really.
And it's complicated because we have a lot of properties and trusts and it's not simple. I mean, it's simple for some of us, but it's not simple for others of us.
It's not an issue of people just not wanting.
No.
No,
It's establishing residency.
because after a couple of years, usually they have pretty high participation.
And will you have a database of being able to track applications? So kind of like, if
Right.
this is the trust and you.
Yep.
Mhm.
When it comes in again, it could.
Yeah, if you had a trust year one, you're going to have likely the same trust year
Right,
5, but
right.
we probably would ask, had there been any changes to the trust, right?
Right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
All right, next we have
Bonds.
water bond renewal rate.
We're rich,
Back to you, Rich.
all rich, all
Um,
the time.
Sorry, I didn't get my printout, so I don't have it in front of me, but the long and the short of it is every time we do a bond issuance, we have to go through a bunch of due diligence with a fiscal advisory agent, with bond counsel, who approves the whole bond issue and then puts it out to the market for a bid and quote process. And so we're obligated to take the lowest responsible bidder in that regard, which was, I believe, Fidelity. And this is to roll over a bond anticipation note. It originally was 2,500,000, but we've paid it down. So I think it's 2,320,000 or 420, one or the other, at this point. And we got several bids, so that's the good news. And we got a low bidder of, I think it's 3.137% net interest cost. And why that's important is because I think they bid the interest rate at 4%. But then they give you a bond premium. And the reason we're interested in a premium is that's cash back to us. And we use that cash to pay for the bond issuance costs, which is over $100,000. So we don't have to appropriate that money by town meeting, and then whatever's left, premiums left in excess of those issuance costs gets reduced against our pay down at the end. So it's not a 4%, even though it says a 4% rate, it translates into 3.137%. And that was the recommendation of our financial advisor.
Okay.
So you need a,
Yeah,
And
what do we need? Do we
motion?
need to read this whole?
So, no,
thing?
so there's a
Okay, good.
long, lengthy motion in the packet. And
yeah,
I
that
think
only Suzanne has to sign, so.
if you refer to a motion that refers to that packet attachment
Okay.
and vote that and sign all the paperwork, I think you're just
All right.
fine.
Okay.
You want the motion?
Yeah, how about Suzanne make, or Suzanne
Suzanne.
make the motion? You don't have to read.
I
the whole
move
thing.
that we vote to approve the votes. What is it?
Ban.
Ban.
Ban
And
renewal
renewal with the language included in the packet.
with the language included in the packet.
I will second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0. No, she left.
Aye.
4-0.
There you go.
All right. Town managers report.
I gotta say,
Did everyone get the signature packet
yes.
making its way down?
Did you sign it all?
Suzanne has a
Yeah.
little few extra signatures in there.
Yeah, she's got
Okay.
a few.
So I'll talk while you sign, if you don't mind. So a couple of things. First of all, I'm gonna say this every meeting now during my report, but between now and town meeting, we are gonna be discussing and voting and recommending everything that's important to voters, to residents about their tax bills, the budget, the services they're going to be getting or not getting. It's really an important time, and I know people are really busy, but between now and May 5th, if you could tune in to our meetings and try and keep track, the way like the finance committee meetings are set up, the agenda does have one department over another, so you can just tune in for one piece. You don't have to watch the whole thing. Same for select board meetings. You know, we're very good at sticking to the agenda in the item, you know, in the order that we have. But if you want to sign up for alerts and notifications, and we will be doing much more communication both on Facebook and on the website, but we also automatically send out alerts to people. For instance, that wastewater alert that went out that we posted on Facebook, that goes to almost 2,000 people that had signed up for notifications. So basically, if you go to the website, right on the landing page of the website, there's a big blue button that says notify me. And if you click on that button, it'll take you to a page that has another button that says notify me sign up link. And if you click that and choose administration, I know administration is weird, but that's what we used to call like the town manager's office. If you click on administration for notifications, you'll get all of those notifications. And we promise they won't be excessive. If we do 3 a month, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And we're probably going to be doing, you know, at least 2 to 3 a month from now until town meeting. But I just wanted to give everyone that chance. We also have a joint planning board and select board workshop on the proposed zoning amendments. Another big thing that we're moving towards town meeting. That's January 31st at 3 o'clock at the library. If people want
21st.
21st. Oh, I'm sorry. 21st at 3 o'clock in the library. And that will be taped so you can watch it afterwards, but I just wanted to, and Massachusetts has formally designated Eastham as a seasonal community. So there's a lot of information on that, and I put the link to that website also in my town report. We also have the new wastewater website up and running as of Friday, so we will continue to load that with more information as we move forward. That's it, thanks.
Town meeting,
Oh,
The,
yeah, town meeting.
the save the date,
Save the date. Town meeting is back to its original day, Monday, May 5th. So it used to be by charter the first Monday in May. So that is May 5th, 2025. We're changing the time to 5:30. It will be at the new Nauset Regional High School, hopefully in the auditorium, but we can also go into the cafeteria and the gym if we need to. And we are going to be looking at childcare options and some food or snacks. So please save that date, May 5th. Now I think.
okay.
Right,
Jerry?
One thing, yeah, the climate action plan meeting on the 29th is at 10. 10 a.m. here in the Earl Mountain Room. Hope you're interested to attend. I think the Cape Cod Commission will be there trying to help us. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's all right. All right, new and upcoming agenda items. Bob, want to talk about fire prevention?
Emergency response is really, how would we respond if we had this, type of situation in our town, with, I mean, and
It's
now
a-
that I'm walking
Consider
around.
getting on the CERT team.
No, it's a great time to do it because it is our, of course, our winter storm hurricane season,
Right.
which is, parallel to these fire events on the West Coast. So definitely we can do a presentation on that and have Adam and
Yeah, and they
The
may
chiefs
even
and
do, some sort of tabletop exercise like we've done before with.
yeah, usually
emergency-
annually we do that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
with a lot of town staff members, and we've also been invited to go.
Yeah.
Any other subjects anyone wants to get on the, no? Nobody? All right, there are no minutes. Kayla said she had trouble getting them loaded up, so no minutes. Any other business? All right, Jerry.
I move we adjourn.
Second.